The gel was cold against my stomach, but that wasn't why I was shivering. Dr. Patricia Hammond had gone silent 3 minutes ago, her eyes fixed on the ultrasound screen with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. In the 5 years I'd been coming to this practice, she'd always been warm and chatty, telling me about her grandchildren while conducting examinations. Now her jaw was tight and a small line had formed between her eyebrows. "Mrs. Clark," she said finally, her voice carefully controlled. "I need to ask you some questions and I need you to answer them as honestly as possible." I tried to laugh but it came out shaky. "You're scaring me, Dr. Hammond. Is something wrong with the baby?" "There is no baby, Simone." She turned to face me directly, and I saw something in her eyes that made my blood run cold. It wasn't pity. It was anger. "How long have you been trying to conceive?" "About 2 years actively," I said, confusion washing over me. "Gregory and I decided we were ready, but nothing's been happening. That's why I came in today. I thought maybe you could run some tests, figure out what's wrong." Dr. Hammond wheeled her stool closer to me, her movements deliberate. "Simone, I'm going to ask you something and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. Do you remember having any medical procedures done about 7 years ago? Anything involving your reproductive system?" My mind went blank. 7 years ago, I just started dating Gregory. We'd met at a charity gala where my marketing firm was handling the event. He'd been charming, attentive, and interested in everything I had to say. Within 6 months, we were inseparable. Within a year, we were married in a ceremony that made the society pages. "No," I said slowly. "I've never had any procedures like that. Why are you asking me this?" Dr. Hammond pulled up something on her computer, then turned the monitor toward me. "Because according to the medical records I just received from your previous physician's office, you had a tubal ligation 7 years ago." The room tilted. "That's impossible. I would remember having my tubes tied. I would never consent to that. That's exactly what concerns me." Dr. Hammond's voice was gentle now, but firm. "I've been a doctor for 30 years, Simone. I've seen a lot of things. When I pulled up your complete medical history this morning to review before your appointment, I found records from a clinic I'd never heard you mention. The procedure was done at a private facility, very exclusive, very expensive. The kind of place where confidentiality is paramount and questions aren't asked." I sat up, pulling the paper gown around myself. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the fabric. "There has to be some mistake. Some error in the records." "There's no mistake." Dr. Hammond pulled out a folder and I saw my name on the tab. "This is your signature on the consent forms. But here's what troubles me, Simone. The handwriting on these forms doesn't match the signature on the documents you've signed in my office." I compared them. I also called the clinic and they confirmed the procedure was scheduled and paid for by someone else. Someone who requested that all follow-up communications go through him, not you. The room was spinning now. Him? Who? But I already knew. The cold certainty was settling into my bones like ice water. "The payment came from Gregory Clark," Dr. Hammond said quietly. "Your husband." I couldn't breathe. The fluorescent lights were too bright, the room too small. Why would he do that? Why would he have that done to me without my knowledge? That's not a question I can answer, but it's one you need to ask yourself. And probably a lawyer. Dr. Hammond reached out and took my hand. "Simone, I'm telling you this not just as your doctor, but as a woman who's seen too many women hurt by people they trusted. Something is very wrong here. The fact that this procedure was done 7 years ago, right around the time you two met, and you have no memory of it suggests something deeply troubling." "But I would have known," I whispered. "I would have felt something, had symptoms, something." "Not necessarily. It's a relatively simple procedure, and if you were told it was something else, if you were sedated and not told the truth about what was being done, you wouldn't have known. Did you have any medical appointments or procedures around that time that seemed odd or that you can't quite remember clearly?" I thought back, my mind racing through memories I hadn't examined in years. There had been something. About 8 months after Gregory and I started dating, I'd gotten sick. Really sick. Some kind of flu that knocked me out for days. Gregory had been so caring, taking me to his private doctor, making sure I had the best care. I remembered feeling groggy, being in and out of consciousness. When I'd finally recovered, there had been some soreness in my abdomen that the doctor said was from the severe cramping I'd experienced while sick. "Oh God," I breathed. He did it then. When I had the flu. I trusted him completely. Dr. Hammond squeezed my hand. "Listen to me very carefully. I am legally obligated to report this. What was done to you was done without your informed consent, which makes it assault. But before I make that call, you need to think about your safety. You need to think about what you're going to do next. If your husband did this to you, if he went to these lengths to prevent you from having children without your knowledge, then there's something very wrong in your marriage. Something potentially dangerous. I need to go home, I said, sliding off the examination table. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself to stand. I need to think. Simone, please, don't go home. Not yet. At least not alone. Is there someone you can call? Someone you trust. I thought of Tasha, my best friend since college. She'd been skeptical of Gregory from the start, though she'd never said anything directly. Just little comments here and there about how he seemed controlling, how he always had to know where I was, who I was with. I dismissed her concerns as overprotectiveness. I can call my friend, I said numbly. Good. Call her now. Have her meet you somewhere public. And Simone. Dr. Hammond stood and put both hands on my shoulders, making me look at her. Get a lawyer. Today. Before you confront your husband about any of this. Get someone who specializes in these kinds of cases. I'm going to write down some names for you. She scribbled on a prescription pad, then handed me the paper. 3 names, all attorneys. One was circled with a note, handled my sister's case. Tough as nails. Tell him I sent you. I dressed in a daze, my mind unable to fully process what I'd just learned. As I walked through the waiting room, I saw a pregnant woman sitting with her hand on her swollen belly, talking softly to her unborn baby. Something inside me cracked open and I had to bite my lip to keep from crying out. In my car, I sat in the parking lot and stared at my phone. Gregory's smiling face looked back at me from the lock screen. We'd taken that photo on our honeymoon in Santorini. He'd been so loving, so perfect. Everyone said I was lucky to have found him. Lucky. My hands were still shaking as I dialed Tasha's number. Hey girl, what's up? Her voice was cheerful, normal. The normalcy of it made me want to scream. Tasha, I need you to meet me. Right now. Somewhere public. My voice didn't sound like my own. Simone? What's wrong? You sound weird. I can't explain over the phone. Can you meet me at that coffee shop near your office? The one with the patio? Of course. I'm leaving now. Are you okay? No, I whispered. No, I'm really not. 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Tasha at a small table in the corner of the patio, far from other customers. I'd ordered coffee I couldn't drink and hadn't touched. Tasha had arrived within 15 minutes, her face tight with concern. I told her everything. The ultrasound appointment. The medical records. The procedure I never consented to. Gregory's payment. The signature that wasn't mine. Tasha's face went through a series of expressions. Shock, disbelief, and then a cold, hard anger that I'd never seen on her before. That son of a bitch, she said quietly. That absolute son of a bitch. I don't understand why, I said, and now the tears were coming hot and fast down my cheeks. Why would he do this to me? If he didn't want children, he could have just said so. We could have talked about it. Why go to these lengths? Because it's not about children, Simone. Tasha reached across the table and gripped my hands. This is about control. This is about him making a choice about your body, your future, without your consent. This is about him deciding what you could and couldn't have in your life. But he's always been so supportive of my career, my dreams. Has he? Or has he just been good at making you think he was supportive while actually controlling every aspect of your life? Tasha pulled out her phone. We're calling this lawyer right now. The one your doctor recommended. It's Saturday. No one will be there. These kinds of lawyers work all the time. Trust me. She dialed the number and to my surprise, someone answered after 3 rings. Patterson Legal Services, how may I help you? Tasha spoke quickly, mentioning Dr. Hammond's name, explaining that it was an emergency. After a moment, she handed me the phone. This is James Patterson, a calm male voice said. Dr. Hammond's sister is a client of mine. She told me if anyone she referred called, I should take it seriously. Can you tell me what's happening? I explained it all again, my voice steadier now. James Patterson listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Mrs. Clark, what was done to you is not only grounds for divorce, it's potentially criminal. I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do not go home alone. Do not confront your husband. Do not tell him you know anything. Can you do that? I don't know. He's away on business until tomorrow night. Good. That gives us time. I need you to come to my office right now. Yes, I know it's Saturday. This can't wait. Bring your friend with you. We need to start building your case immediately, and we need to make sure you're safe. Safe? You think I'm in danger? Mrs. Clark, A man who would have a medical procedure performed on his wife without her knowledge or consent is capable of anything. Until we understand his motives, we have to assume you could be at risk. Please, come to my office now. I'll text this number the address. I looked at Tasha, who nodded firmly. We're on our way, I said. As we drove to the attorney's office, my phone buzzed. A text from Gregory, missing you, beautiful. Can't wait to get home tomorrow and hold you. Love you more than anything. I stared at the words I'd read hundreds of times before, words that used to make me smile. Now they just looked like lies on a screen. Everything was a lie. Our entire marriage was built on deception and betrayal. The coffee I'd tried to drink earlier rose in my throat, and I had Tasha pull over so I could be sick on the side of the road. She held my hair back and rubbed my shoulders, not saying anything, just being there. I don't know who I'm married to, I said when I could finally speak again. I don't know him at all. Then it's time to find out, Tasha said grimly. And then it's time to make him pay for what he's done. As we pulled up to James Patterson's office, a modest building in a professional complex, I realized that my life had divided into before and after. Before the ultrasound, I was Mrs. Gregory Clark, wife of a billionaire, living in a beautiful home, with what I thought was a beautiful life. After the ultrasound, I was Simone, a woman who'd been betrayed in the worst possible way, a woman who had to figure out how to survive what was coming next. The door to the office opened before we could knock. James Patterson was a tall black man in his 50s, with graying hair and kind eyes that looked like they'd seen too much suffering. He ushered us inside quickly, locking the door behind us. Thank you for coming, he said. I know this is overwhelming. Let's sit down and you can tell me everything from the beginning. Every detail, no matter how small or insignificant it might seem. We're going to figure this out, Mrs. Clark. And we're going to make sure you're protected. As I sat in his office and began to tell my story again, I realized that Dr. Hammond's advice wasn't just practical. It was necessary. My marriage wasn't just over. It was a crime scene. And I was going to have to be strong enough to face whatever truths were waiting to be uncovered. Gregory's home office was on the 3rd floor of our house, a massive room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I'd been inside maybe a dozen times in 5 years of marriage. He'd always made it clear it was his private space, where he conducted business that required absolute confidentiality. I'd respected that boundary, never questioned it. Now, standing in the doorway at 2 a.m, I realized how many boundaries I'd respected that were really just walls he'd built to hide his secrets. James Patterson had given me 48 hours. That's how long Gregory would be gone on this particular business trip. 48 hours to search the house, copy documents, find evidence. Tasha stood beside me, having insisted on staying over to help and to make sure I wasn't alone. Where do we even start? I whispered, though there was no one to hear us. Everywhere, Tasha said, pulling on a pair of thin gloves James had provided. He told you to wear these, remember? We can't leave any evidence that we were searching. I pulled on my own gloves, feeling like a criminal in my own home. But what Gregory had done to me was the real crime. I had to keep reminding myself of that. We started with his desk. The drawers were locked, but James had sent someone to teach me how to pick simple locks. It had taken me an hour of practice that afternoon, but I'd finally gotten the hang of it. The first drawer opened with a soft click that sounded like thunder in the quiet house. Inside were files. So many files. I pulled out the first one and opened it, expecting business documents. Instead, I found medical records. My medical records. Going back 7 years. Tasha, look at this. We spread the documents on the desk. There were records from doctors I'd never heard of, test results I'd never seen, prescriptions I'd never taken. Or at least, prescriptions I thought I'd never taken. This says you were on anti-anxiety medication for 3 years, Tasha said, pointing to a prescription record. Have you ever taken anything like that? No. I mean, Gregory gives me vitamins every morning. He's always been really into health and wellness. But these aren't vitamins. I pulled out my phone and photographed every page just as James had instructed. Then I moved to the next drawer. More files. These were financial documents. Insurance policies. My hands stilled when I saw the amounts. Tasha. My voice was barely audible. There are 5 different life insurance policies here. All on me. Totaling $20 million. Tasha leaned over my shoulder, her breath catching. These are dated from different years. The first one was taken out 6 months after you got married. The most recent one is from last month. And look at the beneficiary. Every single policy listed Gregory as the sole beneficiary. In the event of my death, he would receive $20 million in addition to all our joint assets, which were considerable. My marketing firm, which I'd built before I met him, would also revert to him according to paperwork I'd apparently signed 2 years ago, though I had no memory of it. He's been planning this, I said, the words coming out hollow. For years. He's been systematically positioning himself to benefit from my death. We need to photograph all of this, Tasha said, her voice shaking. She was trying to be strong for me, but I could see the fear in her eyes. We worked through the night, photographing everything. The more we found, the worse it got. There was a folder labeled with my name that contained information that made my skin crawl. Copies of my birth certificate, my social security card, my passport. But also things I'd never given him. My college transcripts, my medical history from childhood, financial records from before we met. Someone had compiled an entire dossier on me. And I wasn't the only one. In a locked file cabinet that took me 30 minutes to open, I found folders on other women. 7 of them. Each folder contained similar information. Photos, background checks, financial records, family information. One of the folders had a red X drawn across the front. When I opened it, I found a newspaper clipping about a woman named Helen Rodriguez who had died 3 years ago in what was ruled an accidental drowning. Oh my God, Tasha breathed. Simone, we need to call the police. Not yet, I said, though my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the camera. James said we need to have everything documented first. If we call the police now, Gregory will lawyer up and we might lose access to all of this. But I took extra photos of Helen Rodriguez's folder. If there was any chance Gregory had something to do with her death, it needed to be investigated. The sun was starting to rise when we found the most damning evidence. In the back of the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet, hidden under folders of old tax returns, was a leather journal. Not a business planner, but a personal journal with handwritten entries. I opened it to the first page and saw Gregory's handwriting. The date was 8 years ago, a few months before we met. Father says I need to marry soon, the entry read. The family expects it and it would be good for business. But I have no interest in the complications of a real marriage. I need someone manageable. Someone without family complications who would be difficult if things didn't work out. Someone whose absence wouldn't cause too many questions. My stomach turned. I flipped through more pages, watching the entries detail his search for the perfect wife. The perfect victim. Met someone interesting at the Brennan charity event. Read an entry from 7 years ago. Simone Harper. Marketing executive, self-made, no close family. Parents deceased, no siblings. Small circle of friends. Beautiful, intelligent, but most importantly, isolated. She would be perfect. The clinical nature of the words made me feel like an object, a thing he'd selected off a shelf. Later entries detailed how he'd pursued me, calculated every move, every romantic gesture. How he'd made sure I became dependent on him, subtly isolating me from what few friends I had. How he'd arranged for my primary care physician to retire and recommended his own doctor. How he'd planned the procedure that would ensure I never had children, never had ties that would complicate his eventual plans. But it was the entry from 6 months ago that made my blood run cold. Insurance is all in place. Medical records established show declining health. Timeline is almost complete. Another 6 months to a year at most. Need to be careful about timing. Father is getting impatient, but these things can't be rushed. The settlement from the company sale will help, but this needs to work perfectly. I couldn't read any more. I closed the journal and added it to the stack of documents we were taking with us. James had arranged for a secure storage unit where we could keep copies of everything, just in case something happened to the originals. Simone, Tasha said softly, we need to get you out of here. Right now. I know. I just need to check one more thing. I went to the medicine cabinet in our master bathroom and collected all the vitamins and supplements Gregory gave me every morning. Every single one went into a bag. James had arranged for them to be tested by a private lab. By 7 in the morning we had everything. Tasha helped me pack a suitcase with clothes and personal items, things that were mine from before the marriage. Photos of my parents, jewelry they'd given me, my grandmother's recipe book. Things that mattered, things that were truly mine. What about the rest? Tasha asked, looking around at the beautiful home I'd thought was mine. It's just stuff, I said. None of it matters. None of it was ever really mine anyway. We loaded everything into Tasha's car and drove to the storage unit. By 9 we were at James Patterson's office, spreading everything out on his conference table. James spent 2 hours reviewing the documents, his expression growing darker with each page. Finally he sat back and looked at me. Mrs. Clark, what your husband has done is beyond criminal. This is conspiracy to commit fraud at minimum, potentially conspiracy to commit murder depending on what we find in those supplements. The insurance fraud alone could send him to prison for decades. What about the other woman? I asked. Helen Rodriguez. Do you think he was involved in her death? I think we need to contact the authorities who handled that case and share what we've found. But first, we need to secure your safety and start divorce proceedings. I'm going to file emergency motions tomorrow morning, first thing. We'll get restraining orders, freeze all joint accounts, and start the process of separating your assets from his. He's going to know something's wrong as soon as you file. Yes, he will. Which is why you can't go back to that house. Do you have somewhere safe you can stay? She's staying with me, Tasha said firmly. I have a security system and a big dog. Let him try something. James nodded. Good. I'm also going to recommend you hire private security for a while, at least until we understand what we're dealing with. A man who plans this methodically for years won't give up easily. The rest of the day was spent making statements, signing papers, preparing for what James called the opening salvo. By the time we left his office, it was dark again. I'd been awake for over 36 hours, running on adrenaline and coffee. At Tasha's apartment, I finally allowed myself to break down. I sat on her couch and cried for the life I'd thought I had, for the man I'd thought I'd married, for the future I'd believed was waiting for me. All of it was a lie. All of it had been carefully constructed fiction designed to serve Gregory's purposes. You're going to get through this, Tasha said, holding me while I sobbed. You're the strongest person I know. You built a successful business from nothing. You survived losing your parents in college and put yourself through school. You can survive this. I don't feel strong. I feel like an idiot. How did I not see it? Because you're a good person who trusted someone you loved. That doesn't make you an idiot. That makes you human. He's the monster, not you. My phone buzzed. A text from Gregory, flight delayed. Won't be home until tomorrow evening. Hope you're having a good weekend. Love you. I stared at the words, so normal, so casual. Tomorrow evening he would come home to an empty house and a process server with divorce papers. Tomorrow evening his carefully constructed plan would start falling apart. Do you think he'll be dangerous? I asked Tasha. When he finds out? I think he's already dangerous. But now we know what he is and we're prepared. That's the difference. I tried to sleep but couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes I saw that journal, those clinical notes about selecting me, about planning my eventual death. I'd been nothing but a means to an end, a problem to be solved on a timeline. Around 3 in the morning I got up and went to Tasha's kitchen. She found me there an hour later, sitting at the table with a notebook, writing down every detail I could remember from our relationship. Every strange moment, every time he'd insisted on something that seemed odd, every time I'd dismissed a gut feeling. What are you doing? Tasha asked, putting on coffee. Making my own timeline, I said. James said it might help. All the pieces I didn't see before, they're starting to fit together now. Like the time he insisted on changing my primary care doctor. Or when he wanted to handle all our financial planning and got upset when I said I wanted to stay involved. Or how he always knew where I was, like he had some kind of tracking on me. Tracking? Tasha's eyes widened. Your phone. We spent the next hour examining my phone and laptop. Sure enough, we found tracking software installed on both, hidden in system files. There was also keylogging software that recorded everything I typed. He's been monitoring everything, I said, feeling violated all over again. Every email, every search, every conversation. Not anymore. Tasha took both devices and put them in her microwave. These are evidence, but you need new ones anyway. Clean devices he can't track. James arrived at 8 with new phones and a laptop, all completely clean and secure. He also brought a security specialist who swept Tasha's apartment for bugs and found 2. One in the living room, one in the guest bedroom where I was staying. He must have had someone plant these when he knew you were coming here, James said grimly. This man has resources and he's using them. We need to be smarter. By the time Gregory's flight was scheduled to land, we were ready. The divorce papers were filed. The restraining order was in place. Joint bank accounts were frozen. And I was somewhere he couldn't find me, protected by people he didn't know about. My phone, the new one, rang just after 6. It was James. He's been served, James said. The process server reported that Mr. Clark was shocked and tried to call you immediately. When he couldn't reach you, he called my office. I told him all communication must go through me from now on. He's not taking it well. What did he say? Nothing I can repeat. But Simone, be very careful. I've seen a lot of men in my career, and the way he reacted tells me he's not going to accept this quietly. He's going to fight and he's going to try every method he can to get to you. Promise me you'll stay vigilant. I promise. That night, I lay in Tasha's guest room, in a bed that wasn't mine and a life I barely recognized. But for the first time in years, maybe for the first time since I'd met Gregory, I felt like I could breathe. The truth was horrible, but at least it was the truth. My marriage was a lie. But my freedom was real. And I was going to fight for it with everything I had. The photos were spread across Tasha's coffee table like pieces of a puzzle I never wanted to complete. Gregory and Belle Montgomery at charity events, at business dinners, at what looked like private parties. Some of the photos were dated from before I even met Gregory. Others were recent, including one from just 2 weeks ago. This one is from the weekend he told you he was in Seattle for that tech conference, Tasha said, pointing to an image of Gregory and Belle on what appeared to be a yacht. Doesn't look like Seattle to me. It had been 3 days since Gregory was served with divorce papers. 3 days of him calling James Patterson's office every hour, demanding to speak with me. 3 days of him sending flowers to my old office, to Tasha's address, to every place he could think of. The cards all said the same thing: please call me. Let me explain. I love you. But I couldn't focus on Gregory right now. I was focused on the woman in these photos. Belle Montgomery was stunning, with long dark hair and a smile that looked sharp enough to cut. She was also, according to the business documents we'd found, a 50% partner in 3 of Gregory's ventures. She's not just his mistress, I said, studying a business filing document. She's his business partner. Has been for 7 years. Since right around the time he married you, Tasha observed. The more I dug into Brielle's background, the more questions I had. She came from money, old money. Her family owned hotels across 3 continents. She'd gone to Yale, had an MBA from Harvard. She wasn't someone who needed Gregory's money. So what was her angle? I found the answer in an email chain that had been carelessly saved on Gregory's laptop, which I'd taken with us when we left the house. The emails between Gregory and Belle went back 8 years, starting with what looked like a business proposal. I have someone perfect, Belle had written. She fits all your requirements. Self-made, isolated, clean background. No messy family situations. I can arrange an introduction at the Brennan event next month. My hands went numb as I read. The Brennan event. That's where I'd met Gregory. Where he'd seemed so interested in me, so taken by me. It had all been arranged. Belle had arranged it. I scrolled through more emails, watching the relationship between Gregory and Belle unfold. They weren't just lovers. They were partners in something much darker. The procedure is scheduled. One email from Gregory read, "Your contact at the clinic confirmed. She'll never know." Perfect, Belle had responded. Once that's handled, we move to phase 2. The insurance policies will take time, but we have time. Father says the payout will be split as discussed. Father. Belle kept mentioning her father in the emails. I searched for more information and found a name, Richard Montgomery. A quick web search pulled up articles about Richard Montgomery, hotel magnate and, according to several investigative pieces, suspected money launderer. There were rumors of organized crime connections, though nothing had ever been proven. Several business associates had died in suspicious circumstances over the years. Oh God, I whispered. This is so much bigger than I thought. Tasha looked over my shoulder at the screen. What are we looking at? I think Gregory and Belle aren't just planning to kill me for insurance money. I think they're involved in something much worse. Look at this. I pulled up an email from 2 years ago where Belle referenced the same arrangement father made with the Rodriguez situation. Helen Rodriguez. The woman whose folder I'd found with the red X on it. We need to call the police, Tasha said. Right now. This is beyond what James can handle. But before I could respond, my new phone rang. It was James. Simone, we have a problem. Belle Montgomery just filed a declaration in support of Gregory's countermotion. She's claiming that you've been unstable, that you've made threats against Gregory, and that you're manufacturing evidence. That's insane. I've never even spoken to her. She's also claiming that she's been a concerned friend trying to help Gregory manage your mental health issues for years. She's provided what she claims are text messages between you and her discussing your feelings of paranoia. I've never texted her. I don't even have her number. I know that and you know that, but she's provided phone records that appear to show communication between your old number and hers. Someone went to a lot of trouble to create a false trail. I felt sick. They've been planning for this too. For the possibility that I might find out and try to leave. It appears so. Which means we need to be very careful about what evidence we present and when. They're trying to paint you as unreliable before we can paint them as criminals. I'm working on getting the falsified records thrown out, but it's going to take time. After I hung up with James, I sat staring at Brielle's photos. This woman had helped select me. She'd helped plan the violation of my body, the theft of my fertility, possibly my death. And now she was lying in court documents trying to make me look crazy. I want to know everything about her, I told Tasha. Everything. If she's going to come after me in court, I need to know what I'm dealing with. We spent the next 2 days digging into Belle Montgomery's life. Her social media was carefully curated. Photos of charity work, elegant dinners, art gallery openings. The perfect image of a sophisticated businesswoman. But her business dealings told a different story. 3 companies that Belle had been involved with had collapsed under suspicious circumstances, leaving investors broke while she walked away unscathed. 2 former business partners had accused her of fraud, though the cases were settled out of court with non-disclosure agreements. And most troubling, her name appeared in connection with 2 suspicious deaths, both ruled accidents, both involving wealthy men who had recently changed their insurance beneficiaries to list Belle. She's done this before, I said, showing Tasha what I'd found. Multiple times. She finds wealthy men, partners with them on some scheme, and when things go wrong, she disappears with the money while they take the fall. Or die. How is she not in prison? Money. Connections. Her father's influence. She's been doing this for at least 10 years and she's never been charged with anything. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Helen Rodriguez, the woman with the red X on her folder. I searched for everything I could find about her death. Helen had drowned in her pool 3 years ago. She'd been married to a man named Thomas Rodriguez, who was devastated by her loss. According to news articles, Helen had been a vibrant, healthy woman with no history of health problems. Her death was ruled accidental, though Thomas had pushed for further investigation. The case was eventually closed. On impulse, I searched for Thomas Rodriguez's current contact information and found a business listing. Before I could second-guess myself, I was dialing his number. Rodriguez Consulting, a tired male voice answered. Mr. Rodriguez? My name is Simone Clark. I know this is going to sound strange, but I need to talk to you about your wife. There was a long silence. My wife died 3 years ago. I know. I'm sorry. I'm calling because I think the man I'm divorcing might have been involved in her death. His name is Gregory Clark, and he was connected to a woman named Belle Montgomery. Another silence, longer this time. Then, where are you? We need to talk in person. 2 hours later, I was sitting in a diner across from Thomas Rodriguez, a man who looked like he'd aged decades in 3 years. His eyes were hollow, his face gaunt. But when he looked at me, I saw a spark of something I recognized. The need for truth, for justice. Helen met them at a charity event, Thomas said, his hands wrapped around a coffee cup. Gregory and Belle. They were charming, friendly. Gregory was interested in investing in my business. Within 6 months they were close friends. Or so we thought. Did you notice anything strange? Everything was strange looking back. Helen started having health problems. Dizzy spells, fatigue. The doctors couldn't find anything wrong. Gregory recommended his personal physician. Then Helen had what they said was a minor procedure to help with her symptoms. After that, she seemed better for a while, but then she started getting worse. More tired, more confused. The story was horrifyingly familiar. The night she died, Thomas continued, Gregory and Belle were at our house. They'd come for dinner. Helen went for a swim after they left. I found her an hour later, floating in the pool. The autopsy showed high levels of prescription sedatives in her system. The kind that would make you drowsy, affect your coordination. The police ruled it accidental, said she must have taken too much of her medication and fallen asleep in the water. But you didn't believe that. Helen was careful about her medication. She never took more than prescribed. And those pills weren't even something her doctor had given her. Gregory's doctor had prescribed them. Did you tell the police? I tried. They weren't interested. Gregory had alibis, witnesses placing him and Belle at their hotel when Helen died. His father's lawyers shut down the investigation before it could go anywhere. I couldn't fight them. I didn't have the resources, the connections. I was just a man who'd lost his wife. I reached across the table and took his hand. I'm going to make sure they pay for what they did to Helen. And to me. We have evidence now. Real evidence. And I have a lawyer who specializes in this kind of case. Thomas's eyes filled with tears. Do you really think you can do it? They're so powerful. They have so many resources. They're not invincible. They made mistakes. They left evidence. And now there are two of us who know the truth. Before I left the diner, Thomas gave me copies of everything he had from Helen's case. Medical records, police reports, the autopsy findings. He'd kept it all, unable to let go, unable to accept the official story. "Promise me something," he said as we stood to leave. "Promise me you'll be careful. These people are dangerous. They've killed before and they'll kill again if they feel threatened." "I promise." "And Thomas? Thank you. For keeping Helen's memory alive. For not giving up." Back at Tasha's apartment, I spread Thomas's documents alongside our own. The similarities were striking. The same pattern. Sudden health problems, doctors recommended by Gregory, procedures that left the women weakened, increased insurance policies, and eventually a convenient death. "But it didn't work with you," Tasha said. "You found out before they could complete their plan. Only because of Dr. Hammond. If I'd gone to Gregory's recommended doctor for that ultrasound, they would have lied to me. Told me I was just infertile naturally. I would have never known the truth." The next morning, James called with news. "The police have agreed to look into the Helen Rodriguez case again based on the evidence you and Mr. Rodriguez provided. They're also investigating the other deaths connected to Belle Montgomery. This is bigger than your divorce now, Simone. This is a criminal investigation." "What does that mean for my case?" "It means we have leverage. Gregory and Belle can't make you look unreliable when the police are investigating them for multiple murders. But it also means things are going to get very dangerous. These people are cornered now, and cornered animals are the most dangerous kind." That afternoon, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Simone." The voice was female, smooth, cultured. "This is Belle Montgomery. I think it's time we talked." My heart was pounding. "I have nothing to say to you." "I think you do. 'Cause I can help you. I can give you information about Gregory that you need. I made a mistake getting involved with him and I want to make it right. Please, meet with me. Just the two of us. I promise I'm not what you think I am." Every instinct screamed at me to hang up. But part of me wanted to look this woman in the eye, to see who she really was. "I'm not meeting you alone," I said. "Then bring your lawyer." "But Simone, please, let me explain. Gregory has manipulated both of us. We should be working together, not against each other." I hung up without answering and immediately called James. "Belle just called me. She wants to meet." "Absolutely not. It's a trap." "What if it's not? What if she really does want to flip on Gregory? Then she can do it through proper legal channels. You don't meet with these people, Simone. That's not negotiable." But as I sat there after the call ended, I couldn't stop thinking about Brielle's voice. She'd sounded almost desperate, almost human. Could she really be another victim? Or was this just another layer of manipulation? One thing was certain. I wouldn't rest until I understood exactly who Belle Montgomery was and what her role in all of this had been. Because I had a feeling the truth about her was the key to bringing down not just Gregory but everyone involved in this nightmare. James Patterson's office had transformed into something resembling a police investigation room. 2 walls were covered with timeline charts, the third had photographs pinned in clusters, and the fourth was stacked with boxes of documents. In the center of it all, James stood with 2 assistants, marking up notes on a massive whiteboard. "This is what we have so far," James said, gesturing to the timeline. 8 years ago, Gregory Clark meets Belle Montgomery through family business connections. They devise a plan to target wealthy, isolated individuals, primarily women, for insurance fraud and inheritance schemes. 7 years ago they identify you as a target. I sat in a chair, staring at my life reduced to bullet points and arrows on a wall. Tasha sat beside me, her hand on my shoulder. "The timeline shows a clear pattern," James continued. "Introduction through manufactured circumstances, rapid courtship, marriage, medical manipulation, increasing insurance policies, declining health, and then death made to look accidental or natural. You're the first target who discovered the plot before the final stage." "Lucky me," I said bitterly. "Lucky is right," said one of James's assistants, a sharp-eyed woman named Rachel. "Because now we have a living witness. Someone who can testify to the pattern. Combined with Thomas Rodriguez's information about Helen, we have enough to establish a conspiracy. But we need more," James said. "Right now, Gregory's team is arguing that these are all coincidences. That the medical procedures were consensual. That the insurance policies are normal for high-net-worth individuals. We need to prove intent and we need to prove conspiracy." "How do we do that?" I asked. "By getting someone on the inside to talk," Rachel said. "And I think I know who." She pulled up a photo on her laptop, A young man, maybe 30, with nervous eyes and the look of someone carrying heavy secrets. This is Marcus Davidson. He works at the clinic where your procedure was performed. He's been there for 8 years, which means he was there when you were brought in, and probably when Helen Rodriguez was there too. According to my sources, he's been unhappy at the clinic for a while. Ethical concerns. You want to get him to testify? Tasha asked. If he'll talk to us, Rachel said. It's a risk. He could report back to Gregory. But I think he's our best shot at inside information. 2 days later, I found myself in a coffee shop watching Rachel approach a corner table where Marcus Davidson sat hunched over his phone. I was wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap, positioned at a table where I could see but hopefully not be seen. James had insisted on this precaution. I watched Rachel introduce herself, watched Marcus's face go from confusion to fear to something like relief. They talked for 20 minutes. At one point, Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Rachel something. Her face remained carefully neutral, but I saw her hands tighten on her coffee cup. When Rachel returned to the car where I was waiting, her expression was grim. He kept records, she said. Personal records of every questionable procedure performed at that clinic. He knew something wasn't right and he documented everything. Will he testify? He's scared. The clinic is owned by Richard Montgomery, Brielle's father. Marcus says if they find out he's talking to us, he's dead. Those were his exact words. Then we need to protect him. James is already working on it. Witness protection, the whole deal. But Simone, what Marcus told me is worse than we thought. That clinic has been performing non-consensual procedures on women for years. Not just you and Helen. Dozens of women. All connected to men who have financial relationships with the Montgomery family or with Gregory. I felt like I might be sick. This is an entire operation. It's a criminal enterprise. And it goes all the way to the top of the Montgomery family. Richard Montgomery has been using that clinic as a way to help wealthy men who owe him favors or money, to commit insurance fraud and worse. Gregory was just one client. Over the next week, our case expanded exponentially. Marcus agreed to testify in exchange for immunity and protection. With his help, we identified 15 other women who'd been victimized by the clinic. Some of them had died under suspicious circumstances. Others, like me, were still alive but had suffered health consequences or irreversible procedures. James filed additional motions, and the judge ordered Gregory's assets frozen pending the criminal investigation. His business accounts, personal accounts, properties, everything was locked down. I felt a grim satisfaction knowing he was finally experiencing a fraction of the powerlessness he'd inflicted on me. But Gregory wasn't going down without a fight. His lawyers filed motion after motion, trying to get evidence thrown out, trying to discredit our witnesses, trying to paint me as a vindictive wife making up stories. Brielle submitted another declaration, this one claiming that I'd approached her months ago trying to get her to participate in a scheme against Gregory. It's all lies, I told James. Every word. I know. And the judge knows it too. But we have to respond to every accusation, refute every claim. That's how the system works. The stress was taking its toll. I'd lost weight, wasn't sleeping, jumped at every unexpected sound. Tasha had been amazing, but I could see she was getting worn down too. This had taken over both our lives. One evening, as I sat in Tasha's living room reviewing documents for the 100th time, my phone rang. A known number again. I'd been ignoring these calls, but something made me answer this one. Simone, please don't hang up. It was Gregory. His voice sounded wrong, strained and desperate. I need to talk to you. Just 5 minutes. You're not supposed to contact me directly. There's a restraining order. I know. But I need you to understand. This isn't what it looks like. Brielle, she's the one behind everything. She manipulated me. She manipulated both of us. I was trying to protect you. By having a procedure done on me without my consent? By taking out life insurance policies on me? That was protection? It wasn't supposed to be like this. The procedure, that was her idea. She said it would help you, that you had a genetic condition. I believed her. And the insurance, that was just standard for someone in my position. You're lying. I've seen the emails, Gregory. I've seen your journal. I know exactly what you planned to do to me. There was a long silence. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Gone was the desperate, pleading tone. What remained was cold and hard. You have no idea what you've done, Simone. The people you're messing with, the Montgomery family, they don't forgive. They don't forget. You think you're safe because you have a lawyer and some documents? You're not safe. You'll never be safe. Is that a threat? It's a warning. From someone who used to care about you. Drop this case. Take a settlement. Disappear. Because if you keep pushing, you're going to end up like Helen. And I won't be able to protect you." He hung up before I could respond. My hands were shaking. I immediately called James and reported the call. Within an hour, police had traced the call to a burner phone. Gregory had violated the restraining order, adding another charge to his growing list. But his words haunted me. "The people you're messing with don't forgive." Was I in danger? Was Tasha in danger because she was helping me? That night, James arranged for private security to watch Tasha's apartment. 2 former police officers who now ran a security firm would be monitoring the building 24/7. It should have made me feel better, but instead it just reinforced how serious the situation had become. "We're close," James told me during an emergency meeting. "The prosecutor's office is preparing charges. Multiple charges: conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, medical battery, witness intimidation. Both Gregory and Belle will be arrested soon. You just need to hold on a little longer." "What about Richard Montgomery?" "He's the big fish they really want. But he's also the most protected. They're building a RICO case against him, using this situation as one piece of a larger pattern. It's going to take time." Time. That's what everyone kept telling me I needed. But time felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. Every day that passed felt like a day closer to something terrible happening. The break came from an unexpected source. One of the other women Marcus had identified, a woman named Patricia Chen who'd survived the same procedure I'd had, came forward. She'd been married to a business associate of Richard Montgomery's. Her husband had tried the same scheme, but Patricia had gotten suspicious and started her own investigation. She had recordings. Hours of recordings of her husband talking to Belle, planning Patricia's death, discussing how to make it look like natural causes. "This is huge," James said, playing the recordings in his office. "This proves the conspiracy. This shows Brielle's involvement beyond any doubt." In the recordings, Brielle's voice was clear and cold as she discussed the best ways to increase Patricia's doses of medication, how to create believable symptoms, when to call for emergency services to ensure Patricia couldn't be saved. It was chilling and exactly what we needed. With Patricia's evidence added to our case, the prosecutor moved quickly. Arrest warrants were issued for Gregory, Belle, and 3 other associates involved in the clinic operations. Richard Montgomery was named as an unindicted co-conspirator, with charges pending as the investigation continued. I watched the news coverage from Tasha's apartment as Gregory was led out of his office building in handcuffs. He looked smaller somehow, diminished without his power and money to hide behind. Belle was arrested the same day at her apartment. Unlike Gregory, she smiled for the cameras, confident that her father's lawyers would have her out within hours. But bail was denied for both of them. The judge ruled they were flight risks with access to significant resources. They would remain in custody until trial. "It's really happening," I said to Tasha, watching the coverage. "They're actually going to pay for what they did." "Justice doesn't bring back the time they stole from you," Tasha said quietly. "It doesn't undo what was done. But it's something." That night, for the first time in months, I slept through the night. No nightmares, no waking up in panic. When I opened my eyes the next morning, sunlight was streaming through the window, and I felt something I hadn't felt since that ultrasound appointment: hope. The path forward was still long. There would be a trial, testimony, months of legal proceedings. But the hardest part was over. I'd survived. I'd fought back. And I'd won the first battle in a war I never asked to fight. The day Gregory's assets were unfrozen by court order, I received a notification that he'd withdrawn $50,000 from one of our joint accounts before James could freeze it again. It was a violation of the court order, but more concerning was what he might be planning to do with that money. People don't withdraw large amounts of cash unless they're trying to hide something or pay for something they don't want traced. "We've alerted the prosecutor," James told me over the phone, "and I've asked for increased security at your location. Gregory is getting desperate, and desperate people make dangerous choices." He was right to be concerned. That evening, as I was helping Tasha prepare dinner, our security guard knocked on the door with an urgent message. Someone had been spotted watching the building from a parked car across the street. The police were on their way. By the time the officers arrived, the car was gone. But they'd gotten the license plate, and within an hour we had an answer. The car was registered to a private investigation firm known for using questionable methods. Gregory had hired someone to watch me. "That's it," Tasha said, her fear turning to anger. "We're not staying here anymore. He knows where I live. We need to go somewhere he can't find you." James agreed and arranged for us to stay at a secure location, a corporate apartment building with 24-hour security and cameras at every entrance. It felt like going into hiding, which I hated. But I hated the idea of putting Tasha in danger more. The new apartment was sterile and impersonal, but it was safe. We moved our essential belongings in the middle of the night, using a moving service James had vetted personally. The security team swept the apartment for bugs before we even brought our suitcases inside. "This is insane," I said, looking around at the bland furniture and beige walls. "I'm living like a fugitive because of what he did to me." "Temporarily," Tasha reminded me. "Once the trial is over and he's convicted, you can go back to living normally." But would I ever really live normally again? Even if Gregory went to prison, even if justice was served, I would always be the woman who'd been targeted, manipulated, violated. That would be part of my story forever. 3 days after we moved, I got a call from an unknown number. I changed my number twice, but somehow Gregory kept getting the new one. This time I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. "Simone, I know you're not going to believe me, but I need to see you. Face to face. Not to threaten you, not to manipulate you. I need you to understand what really happened. There's so much you don't know. Please, meet me somewhere public, somewhere you feel safe. Bring your lawyer if you want. But please let me explain. You deserve to know the whole truth." His voice sounded broken, genuinely anguished. But I'd learned not to trust anything about Gregory, including his emotions. Every tear, every declaration of love, every moment of apparent sincerity had been a performance. Why would this be any different? Still, part of me wanted to hear what he had to say. Not because I believed he could justify his actions, but because I wanted to look him in the eye and let him see that he hadn't broken me. That I'd survived him. "Bad idea," James said when I told him about the voicemail. "He's going to try to manipulate you into dropping the charges or at least sympathizing with him. That's what abusers do." "I know that. But I want to do this. I need to face him. And maybe if he talks to me, he'll say something we can use in court. If you insist on this, we do it my way. Controlled environment, security present, and he gets recorded. Everything he says goes on the record." 2 days later, I sat in a private room at James's office building, waiting for Gregory to arrive. The room had cameras in 3 corners, and there were 2 security guards stationed outside the door. James sat beside me, a recording device on the table between us. When Gregory walked in, I barely recognized him. He'd lost weight, his usually impeccable appearance was rumpled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a man who wasn't sleeping, who was carrying the weight of his crimes. "Simone," he said, his voice catching. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." "I'm here to listen," I said, keeping my voice steady. "But I'm not here to forgive you or to be manipulated. Say what you need to say." He sat down across from us, his hands folded on the table. For a long moment he just looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes that might have been regret. Or might have been just another performance. "I need you to know that when I met you, I didn't intend for things to go this far," he began. "Belle approached me with the idea. She said her father had a business opportunity, a way to make money that was foolproof. I was struggling at the time. My company was failing, I had debts I couldn't pay. The plan seemed like the only way out." "The plan to marry me and kill me," I said flatly. He flinched. "It wasn't supposed to be like that. The original plan was just to get married, take out insurance policies, and then stage a divorce after a few years. We'd split the settlement money. No one would get hurt. Except I would have lost years of my life to a fake marriage. I know that was wrong. But I convinced myself it wasn't that bad. You'd get to live well, have a nice life, and then when we divorced, you'd get a settlement too. Everyone would win. Until the plan changed," James said. "Until it became about murder." Gregory's face crumpled. "That was Belle. She said the divorce option was too risky, that you might figure things out, that there were too many variables. She convinced me that the only way to ensure the plan worked was to go all the way. She had experience with this kind of thing. She knew how to make it look natural." "Helen Rodriguez," I said. "You helped murder her." "No." Gregory's voice was sharp. "I didn't know about Helen until after. Belle told me it was a successful operation, that it had worked perfectly. But she never told me the details. When I found out Helen had died, I tried to back out of our plan. I told Belle I couldn't do it. That's when. She told me about her father, about how deep I was already in. She said if I backed out, her father would make sure I lost everything and possibly ended up dead myself. So you decided to kill me instead." "I decided to stall. To delay. I kept making excuses about why we couldn't move forward. I genuinely started to care about you, Simone. I know you don't believe that, but it's true. The more time I spent with you, the more I realized how terrible this plan was. Then why didn't you just tell me the truth? Why didn't you go to the police? Because I was a coward. Tears were running down his face now. Because I was terrified of what Richard Montgomery would do if I betrayed them. Because I'd already gone too far, already done terrible things, and I didn't see a way out. The procedure, I said. You had that done to me. You took away my ability to have children. That was Brielle's insurance policy. She said it would make you more dependent on me, that it would prevent complications. I tried to argue against it, but she insisted. She arranged everything. I just signed the paperwork and made sure you showed up. And you gave me medications I didn't need. You were slowly poisoning me. The vitamins I gave you weren't poison. They were just placebos mixed with mild sedatives. Brielle wanted me to give you something stronger, something that would cause real health problems, but I refused. That's why the plan wasn't working according to her timeline. That's why she was getting angry with me. James leaned forward. Mr. Clark, are you saying Brielle Montgomery was the primary architect of this conspiracy? Yes. She planned everything. She selected Simone. She arranged for the procedure. She pushed for the insurance policies. She set the timeline. I was just following her instructions because I was too afraid of her father to do anything else. And yet you're the one who married Simone under false pretenses, James said. You're the one who signed off on medical procedures. You're the one who controlled her life for 5 years. Blaming Brielle doesn't absolve you of responsibility. I know that. I'm not trying to avoid responsibility. I'm trying to explain how this happened, how I let myself become part of something so monstrous. I was weak and selfish, and I hurt the one person who actually cared about me. I'd been silent, letting him talk, watching his face for signs of deception. Part of what he was saying felt true. But I also knew that manipulators often mix truth with lies to make their stories more believable. If Brielle was controlling everything, do you have proof? I asked. Emails, recordings, anything that shows she was directing you? Some. I kept some of our communications as insurance. I never trusted her completely, and I wanted to have evidence in case things went wrong. I can give that to you, to your lawyer. Everything I have. Why should I believe you're telling the truth now? Gregory looked at me, and for just a moment, I saw the man I'd thought I'd married. The vulnerable, human person beneath the lies. Because I'm going to prison either way, he said quietly. My life as I knew it is over. The only thing I can do now is try to make sure the whole truth comes out. Brielle and her father need to pay for what they've done. Not just to you and Helen, but to all the other women they've targeted. And I'm the only one who can give you the evidence to make that happen. James and I exchanged glances. If Gregory was telling the truth, if he really had evidence that could connect Richard Montgomery to the conspiracy, it could be the break we needed to bring down the entire operation. I'll need to see the evidence before we can discuss any kind of deal, James said. And even then there are no guarantees. You've committed serious crimes, Mr. Clark. The best you can hope for is a reduced sentence in exchange for cooperation. I understand. I'll cooperate fully. But I have one condition. You're not in a position to make conditions, I said. Please, just hear me out. I want to make sure Simone is protected. Testifying against Richard Montgomery is dangerous. He's had people killed for less. If I'm going to give you what you need to prosecute him, I need to know that Simone will be kept safe. Full witness protection if necessary. Despite everything, despite all the lies and manipulation and betrayal, I felt a flicker of something at his words. Not forgiveness, not even sympathy. But recognition that maybe, buried deep beneath all the terrible choices, there had been some small part of him that genuinely cared. The prosecutor's office will make those decisions, James said. But we'll take your concern under advisement. Now, where is this evidence? I have it in a safety deposit box at a bank downtown. I'll give you the key and the access information. But I want immunity from prosecution for anything revealed in those documents. And I want a guarantee that Simone will be protected. James stood. I'll need to consult with the prosecutor. This meeting is over for now. Mr. Clark, you'll be contacted within 24 hours with our response. As Gregory stood to leave, he looked at me one last time. Simone, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I've destroyed any chance of you ever believing anything I say. But I need you to know that falling in love with you wasn't part of the plan. That was real. That's the one thing that was real. It doesn't matter if it was real, I said. Love without respect, without honesty, without basic human decency isn't love at all. It's just another form of abuse. He nodded slowly, tears still streaming down his face, and let the security guards escort him out. When we were alone, I slumped back in my chair, emotionally exhausted. "Do you believe him?" Tasha asked. She'd been watching from an observation room next door. "I believe some of it," I said. "I think he's probably telling the truth about Belle being the mastermind. But I also think he's trying to minimize his own guilt. He made choices. Every step of the way he chose to go along with it. He doesn't get to blame it all on fear and manipulation." "The evidence he mentioned could be crucial," James said. "If he really has documentation showing Richard Montgomery's involvement, we could take down the entire network. Not just Gregory and Belle, but everyone involved in these operations." "Then make the deal," I said. "Get the evidence. Protect the other women who might be targeted. But make sure Gregory understands that cooperating doesn't mean he's forgiven. It just means he's doing the bare minimum to be human." That night, alone in the corporate apartment, I thought about Gregory's words. Part of me wanted to believe that he genuinely cared about me, that there had been something real in our marriage. But I knew that path led to confusion and pain. The truth was simple. Whatever feelings Gregory might have had for me, they weren't strong enough to make him do the right thing. They weren't strong enough to make him stop the plan, confess the truth, or protect me from harm. In the end, that was all that mattered. Not his regrets or his tears or his claims of love. Just his actions. And his actions had been those of a man willing to let me die for money. There could be no forgiveness for that. Only justice. The evidence Gregory provided was damning. Hours of recorded phone calls, emails going back years, financial documents showing payments from Richard Montgomery to various operatives, and a detailed ledger of every woman who'd been targeted by their operation. James spent 2 days reviewing everything with the prosecutor's office before calling me with the news. "They're offering Gregory a deal," James said. 20 years instead of life, eligible for parole after 15 if he testifies against Belle and her father. In exchange, he turns over everything and cooperates fully with the investigation. "What about me?" "You're being placed in a witness protection program effective immediately. The prosecutor believes Richard Montgomery will try to prevent you from testifying, possibly violently. They're not taking chances." The reality of that statement hit me like cold water. Witness protection meant leaving everything behind. My business, my home, my identity. Starting over completely. "For how long?" I asked. "Until the trial is over and Richard Montgomery is in custody. Could be months. Could be longer if there are appeals or additional investigations." I looked around the corporate apartment that had been my temporary refuge. I'd already lost so much. My marriage, my fertility, my sense of safety. Now I was losing everything else too. "What about Tasha?" "She can go with you if she wants, or she can stay here under protection. It's her choice." When I told Tasha, her response was immediate. "I'm coming with you. Obviously. Tasha, you have your job, your life here. You can't just give all that up. Watch me. You're my family, Simone. You've been my family since we were 18 years old. Where you go, I go. Besides, I could use a change of scenery." The logistics of disappearing were more complex than I'd imagined. New names, new backgrounds, new everything. The marshals assigned to our case spent hours coaching us on our cover stories, making sure we could answer questions about our fake histories without hesitation. "You'll be Hannah Foster," one marshal told me, handing me documents with my new identity. "Born in Portland, worked in pharmaceutical sales, recently relocated for a job opportunity. Keep it simple, keep it boring. People don't remember boring." Tasha became Rebecca Chin, my roommate and friend from college. We were moving to a mid-sized city in the Midwest, far from anyone who might recognize us. The marshals had arranged jobs for both of us at a marketing firm that was cooperating with the investigation. On our last day before leaving, I went to visit Thomas Rodriguez. I'd promised to update him on the case and I owed him a goodbye. "They're really going after all of them?" Thomas asked, his eyes bright with hope. "The whole operation?" "Yes. Gregory's evidence plus what Patricia Chen provided gives them everything they need. Richard Montgomery, Belle, the doctors at the clinic, everyone involved. They're all going down." "Helen would be glad," Thomas said quietly. "She'd be glad that her death meant something, that it helped stop this from happening to other women." "I'm testifying for her too," I told him. "When I'm on that stand, I'm not just speaking for myself. I'm speaking for Helen and for all the others." Thomas hugged me goodbye and I saw tears in his eyes. "Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for fighting." The safe house they moved us to was a small ranch home in a neighborhood of similar houses. Our street was quiet, tree-lined, almost aggressively normal. The marshals set up security measures. Cameras, panic buttons, regular check-ins. But they emphasized that our best protection was anonymity. As long as no one knew who we really were, we were safe. Adjusting to our new identities was strange. I'd spent 32 years as Simone, and now I had to remember to respond to Hannah. The marketing job was legitimate work, though my boss knew I was in the witness protection program. The other employees thought I was just a new hire. Days blurred into weeks. Tasha, now Rebecca, and I fell into a routine. Work, home, occasional trips to the grocery store or a safe, public restaurant. We couldn't use social media, couldn't contact old friends, couldn't do anything that might reveal our location. It felt like being in prison even though we were technically free. This is temporary, Tasha reminded me whenever I got restless. Once the trial is over, once Richard Montgomery is locked up, we can go back to our real lives. But I wondered if that was true. Could I ever really go back? Even if I returned to my old city, my old name, would I ever feel safe again? Would I ever trust anyone again? 2 months into our new lives, James called with an update. The trial date had been set for 3 months away. All the defendants, Gregory, Belle, Richard Montgomery, and 5 associates, would be tried together. The prosecution expected the trial to last at least 4 weeks. You'll need to testify early, James said. Probably within the first week. After that, you might be able to return to the safe house until the verdict. And if they're convicted? Then you're free. You can reclaim your identity, return to your life, though I'd recommend staying away from your old address for a while. But yes, once they're in prison, the threat level drops significantly. The week before I was scheduled to testify, my anxiety reached new heights. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I kept imagining everything that could go wrong. What if I froze on the stand? What if the defense attorneys tore apart my testimony? What if the jury didn't believe me? You're going to do great, Tasha assured me. You're strong, you're articulate, and you're telling the truth. That's all that matters. But strength felt like a relative concept. I'd been strong enough to leave Gregory, strong enough to gather evidence, strong enough to go into hiding. Was I strong enough to face him in court? To look him in the eye while recounting everything he'd done to me? The night before I was supposed to fly back for the trial, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Simone. The voice was female, cultured, cold. Belle Montgomery. I know you think you're safe, but you're not. My father has resources you can't imagine. If you testify, you'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. But if you refuse to testify, if you tell the prosecutor you can't go through with it, we can all move on with our lives. My hand was shaking, but my voice was steady. How did you get this number? That's not important. What's important is that you understand what's at stake. My father doesn't lose. He doesn't accept defeat. If you put him in prison, he will make sure you pay for it, no matter how long it takes. Is that a threat? It's a reality check. You're one woman with a lawyer and some documents. He's a man with connections in every level of government and law enforcement. Think about what you're doing, Simone. Think about whether your revenge is worth your life. She hung up before I could respond. I immediately called my handler, who traced the call to another burner phone. Belle had somehow gotten my protected number, which meant their reach was even longer than we'd thought. We need to move you to a new location immediately, my handler said. If they have your number, they might have your address. Within 2 hours, Tasha and I were being relocated to a different safe house in a different city. This one was more isolated, at the end of a rural road with only one way in or out. The security was tighter, the restrictions more severe. This is what they want, I told Tasha as we unpacked in yet another unfamiliar bedroom. They want me scared, they want me to give up, they want me to run. Are you thinking about not testifying? Tasha asked carefully. No. Hell no. If anything, Brielle's call just made me more determined. They think they can intimidate me into silence? They're wrong. I'm testifying if I have to crawl to that courthouse. The day of my testimony, I wore a blue dress that Tasha had picked out. Nothing flashy, nothing that would distract from my words. The marshals escorted me into the courthouse through a back entrance, avoiding the media circus out front. In the courtroom, I saw Gregory for the first time in months. He was seated at the defense table between his attorneys, looking small and defeated. When he saw me, something flickered in his eyes. Regret, maybe. Or fear. Belle sat at a separate defense table, perfectly composed in an expensive suit, her expression unreadable. She looked at me like I was an interesting problem to be solved, nothing more. And then there was Richard Montgomery, the man who'd orchestrated all of this. He was older than I'd expected, maybe 70, with silver hair and cold eyes. He looked at me with open contempt, as if I were an insect that dared to challenge him. I took the stand and swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor, a fierce woman named Sarah Chin, began her questioning gently, establishing who I was and how I'd met Gregory. As I told my story, I watched the jury. 12 faces, 12 people who would decide whether justice would be served. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked skeptical. All of them were paying attention. I described the ultrasound appointment, the discovery of the procedure I never consented to. I described finding the documents in Gregory's office, the insurance policies, the journal with his plans. I described learning about Helen Rodriguez and the other victims. The defense attorneys tried to rattle me during cross-examination. They implied I was lying for money, that I was mentally unstable, that I'd consented to everything and was now having regrets. But I'd prepared for this. I remained calm, answered every question clearly, and stuck to the truth. When it was over, after nearly 6 hours on the stand, I was escorted back to the safe house. I was exhausted, wrung out, but also relieved. I'd done it. I told the truth. Whatever happened next was out of my hands. Over the next 3 weeks, I followed the trial from a distance through updates from James. Other victims testified. Marcus from the clinic testified. Patricia Chin played her recordings. Gregory testified against Belle and her father, detailing their operations and his role in them. The defense tried every tactic they could think of. They attacked the credibility of witnesses. They argued that the evidence was circumstantial. They painted Gregory as the real mastermind who was now trying to shift blame. But the prosecution had built an overwhelming case. Too much evidence, too many victims, too clear a pattern. Finally, after 4 weeks of testimony, the jury began deliberations. James called to tell me it would likely take several days for them to reach a verdict. Instead, they came back in 6 hours. Guilty, James said when he called. On all counts. All 3 main defendants. Gregory, Belle, and Richard Montgomery. Guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, medical battery, and a dozen other charges. I sat down hard on the couch, the news not quite feeling real. They're going to prison. For a very long time. Richard Montgomery is 72. He'll never see freedom again. Belle is looking at 40 to 50 years. Gregory got his reduced sentence, 20 years, but with the other charges he'll serve at least 18 before parole is even possible. That night, Tasha and I celebrated quietly with takeout and sparkling cider. No alcohol. I'd learned I didn't need substances to numb my feelings anymore. I needed to feel everything, the grief and the anger and the triumph, all of it. Because feeling it meant I was alive, meant I'd survived. What now? Tasha asked. Now, I said, I figure out who Simone is. Not Gregory's wife. Not a victim. Just Simone. Whoever that turns out to be. It was the scariest and most liberating thought I'd had in years. The day the judge read the sentences, I sat in the courtroom and watched justice being served. Richard Montgomery, life without parole. Belle Montgomery, 45 years, no parole for 30. Gregory, 20 years, eligible for parole after 15. Do the defendants wish to make any statements before sentencing is finalized? The judge asked. Richard Montgomery stood, his expensive suit somehow looking cheap in the fluorescent courtroom lights. This is a miscarriage of justice. My family will appeal this verdict and we will be vindicated. Even facing life in prison, he couldn't accept defeat. The judge's expression didn't change. Your right to appeal is noted. Sentence stands. Belle didn't make a statement. She simply stared at me across the courtroom with eyes that promised this wasn't over, that somehow, someday, there would be consequences for what I'd done. I stared right back, refusing to look away. I wasn't afraid of her anymore. Gregory stood last. I want to apologize to Simone and to the families of all the victims. I have no excuse for what I did. I deserve to be punished. The only thing I can do now is make sure no one else gets hurt by cooperating fully with ongoing investigations. His words sounded rehearsed, hollow. Maybe he meant them, maybe he didn't. It didn't matter anymore. He would spend the next 2 decades in prison regardless of his sincerity. As the defendants were led away, I felt Tasha's hand grip mine. It's really over. Phase 1 is over, James corrected. Now comes the civil litigation. You're entitled to sue for damages, Simone. And there are substantial assets to recover. But money was the last thing on my mind as I left the courthouse. Outside, reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed. I'd been advised not to make a statement, to let the prosecution handle the media. But standing there, looking at all those faces waiting for me to speak, I realized I needed to say something. I'm speaking today not just for myself, but for Helen Rodriguez and all the other women who were targeted by this operation. I began, my voice stronger than I expected. What happened to us wasn't just criminal, It was a systematic violation of the most basic human rights. We trusted people who saw us as nothing more than opportunities for profit. But we survived, and our survival matters. If you're in a relationship where someone controls your medical care, your finances, or your access to information, please reach out for help. You deserve better. We all deserve better. The questions came rapid fire after that, but James guided me to a waiting car. As we drove away from the courthouse, I looked back at the building where justice had been served. It felt surreal, like watching a scene from someone else's life. What now? Tasha asked from the back seat. Now we go home, I said. The real home. Not a safe house. Home. The marshals had cleared me to return to my old city, though they recommended I find a new place to live rather than returning to the house I'd shared with Gregory. That was fine with me. I never wanted to see that house again, never wanted to walk through rooms where I'd lived a lie for 5 years. James had been busy during the trial. He'd filed civil suits on my behalf, seeking damages from Gregory's estate, from the Montgomery family assets, and from the clinic that had performed the procedure. He estimated it would take years to sort through everything, but early estimates suggested I could receive substantial compensation. The house sold for $4.2 million, James told me during a meeting to review finances. After paying off the mortgage and legal fees, your share is about $1.8 million. Combined with what we've recovered from joint accounts and investments, you're looking at close to $3 million in liquid assets. $3 million. More money than I'd ever had before. But it felt tainted somehow, like blood money paid for suffering. I want to do something with it, I said. Something that matters. That's how the foundation started. I called it New Beginning, a resource center for women escaping manipulative or dangerous relationships. We provided legal services, medical advocacy, counseling, and financial support to help women rebuild their lives. Tasha quit her marketing job to run the foundation with me. Together, we found office space in a renovated building downtown, hired a small staff, and began spreading the word. Within 3 months, we were helping a dozen women. Within 6 months, 50. The work was hard and emotionally draining. Every woman who came through our doors had a story of betrayal, of trust violated. But seeing them find their footing again, seeing them rebuild their confidence and reclaim their lives, made every difficult day worthwhile. You've created something beautiful out of something terrible, Tasha told me one evening as we locked up the office. That takes a special kind of strength. But I didn't feel particularly strong. I felt like someone who'd survived a disaster and was now trying to make sense of the wreckage. Some days were good. I'd go hours without thinking about Gregory or the trial. Other days, the weight of it all came crashing back, and I'd find myself crying in my car or lying awake at night replaying moments from our marriage. Therapy helped. Dr. Morrison, a trauma specialist, met with me twice a week. She helped me understand that healing wasn't linear, that setbacks were normal, that I didn't have to have everything figured out right away. You're rebuilding your identity, she explained during one session. For 5 years, you were defined by your relationship with Gregory. Now you have to figure out who you are independently, and that's a process. I moved into a bright, airy apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I decorated it myself, choosing colors and furniture that made me happy. Lots of deep greens and rich blues, nothing beige or neutral. I wanted every space to feel alive, to remind me that I was alive. 6 months after the trial, I got an unexpected call from Patricia Chin, the other survivor who testified. She wanted to meet for coffee. I've been thinking about what you said about the foundation, Patricia began after we'd settled into a corner table. I want to help. I have resources, connections, and experience with exactly what these women are going through. Let me work with you. Patricia became the foundation's 3rd board member and brought invaluable expertise. She'd been through hell with her husband's attempted murder and had come out the other side stronger and more determined to help others. We're creating the resource we wish had existed for us, Patricia said during one of our planning meetings. Somewhere women can go when they first suspect something is wrong, before it escalates to the point of danger. The foundation grew. We added a hotline, support groups, partnerships with law enforcement and medical facilities. We created educational programs to help women recognize the warning signs of manipulation and control. We became a voice for women who felt voiceless. Meanwhile, the legal battles continued. Brielle's father's assets were being seized, but the Montgomery family lawyers fought every step. They filed appeal after appeal, trying to overturn the convictions or at least reduce the sentences. Each filing felt like a fresh violation, a reminder that even from prison they were still trying to hurt me. They'll run out of options eventually, James assured me. Their appeals have no merit. The courts will deny them. He was right, but it didn't make the waiting easier. Every court date felt like reliving the trauma. Every legal document with their names on it felt like seeing a ghost. 7 months after the trial, I received a letter forwarded through James's office. It was from Gregory, written from prison. Dear Simone, I don't expect you to read this and I have no right to ask anything of you. But I wanted you to know that I think about you every day. Not with hope that you'll forgive me, but with recognition of what I destroyed. I'm working with the prosecutor's office on additional cases. 3 more operations similar to ours have been identified, and my testimony is helping bring those perpetrators to justice. It's not enough. Nothing I do will ever be enough to make up for what I took from you. But it's something. You asked me once why I didn't just tell you the truth, why I didn't walk away before it got this far. I've thought about that question every day for the past year. The truth is I was a coward. I chose comfort over courage, money over morality, and compliance over doing what was right. I don't ask for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that you did the right thing by fighting back. You saved lives, including possibly mine. Prison is where I belong. I hope you're finding peace. Gregory. I read the letter 3 times trying to feel something. Anger, sadness, relief. But mostly I just felt tired. Tired of Gregory, tired of the whole situation, tired of carrying the weight of his guilt along with my own trauma. Are you going to respond? Tasha asked when I showed her the letter. No. What would I say? He's right that he doesn't deserve forgiveness, and I'm not ready to give it even if he did. This is his journey, not mine. I filed the letter away and tried not to think about it. Gregory was part of my past, a chapter that was closed. I needed to focus on my present and future. But closing that chapter was harder than I expected. Sometimes I'd catch myself thinking about the good moments in our marriage, the times when I'd believed we were happy. Were those moments real, or were they all part of his performance? Had he ever genuinely cared about me, or was I just a mark from the beginning? Does it matter? Dr. Morrison asked when I brought it up in therapy. Whether he cared or not, whether any of it was real, you're still here. You still survived. You still built something meaningful from the wreckage. That's your truth regardless of his. She was right, but it still hurt to realize that 5 years of my life had been built on lies. 5 years I couldn't get back, experiences I thought were shared that were really just manipulation. The 1-year anniversary of my testimony approached. The foundation threw a small celebration, honoring not just my survival but the survival of every woman we'd helped. There were 30 women in attendance, all at different stages of their healing journey. A year ago, I didn't know if I'd survive what was happening to me, I told the group. Today I'm not just surviving. I'm living. We all are. And that's worth celebrating. After the event, Patricia pulled me aside. You know what the difference is between you and a lot of survivors? You turned your pain into purpose. Not everyone can do that. Anyone can do it, I said. They just need support and resources. That's what we're providing. That night, alone in my apartment, I looked out at the city lights and thought about how far I'd come. From a woman who'd trusted the wrong person to a woman who'd fought back and won. From a victim to a survivor to an advocate. The journey wasn't over. There would be more court dates, more legal battles, more trauma to process. But I wasn't the same person who'd walked into that ultrasound appointment a year ago. That woman had been naive, trusting, willing to overlook red flags. This woman, the one I was becoming, was wiser. Stronger. More careful, yes, but also more alive. I'd learned the difference between healthy caution and paranoia, between self-protection and self-isolation. And I'd learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is start over. New city, new life, new identity, but the same core self. The woman I'd been before Gregory, before the lies and manipulation, was still here. I was finding her again, piece by piece. My phone buzzed with a text from Tasha. Dinner tomorrow? Want to celebrate you surviving your first year of freedom. I smiled and typed back, absolutely. But we're celebrating both of us. I couldn't have done any of this without you. And that was true. Tasha had been there for every court date, every panic attack, every moment of doubt. She'd given up her own life to go into hiding with me. She'd worked side by side with me to build the foundation. She was more than a friend. She was family. As I got ready for bed, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. Really looked at myself for the first time in months. The woman looking back had gray streaks in her hair that hadn't been there a year ago. Lines around her eyes from too many sleepless nights. But also a strength in her gaze that was new. I'd survived. Not just physically but emotionally, spiritually. I'd looked evil in the face and refused to let it break me. And that was something no one could ever take away. Freedom, I was learning, wasn't just about being physically safe from threat. It was about reclaiming your story, your identity, your right to define yourself. It was about choosing each day to keep going, keep growing, keep fighting for the life you deserved. And that's exactly what I was doing. The civil trials began 14 months after the criminal convictions. Unlike the criminal case, these proceedings were about money and accountability. James filed separate suits against Gregory's estate, the Montgomery family holdings, and the medical clinic. Each case required testimony, evidence, and endless depositions. This is the part people don't talk about, James told me as we prepared for yet another court appearance. Criminal cases get the headlines, but civil cases are where victims actually get compensated for their suffering. The first case to go to trial was against the clinic. The medical board had already revoked the licenses of 3 doctors involved, but we were seeking damages for what had been done to me and the other victims. The clinic's lawyers tried to argue that the procedures had been properly authorized, that they'd followed standard protocols, that they had no reason to suspect anything illegal was happening. But Marcus's testimony, combined with the internal records he'd kept, showed a pattern of procedures performed without proper consent, records that had been falsified, and payments that came from suspicious sources. The jury awarded me $5 million in damages. The other victims who joined the suit received similar amounts. The clinic filed for bankruptcy within a week. We'll probably never see all of that money, James warned me. Bankruptcy means assets get divided among creditors. But it's still a win. We shut them down. They can't hurt anyone else. The case against Gregory's estate was more straightforward. His assets were substantial even after legal fees and the government seizures. The court awarded me $8 million from the marital estate, far more than a typical divorce settlement because of the criminal nature of his actions. This is justice, Patricia said when she heard the verdict. He tried to profit from your death. Instead, you're profiting from his crimes. But the Montgomery case was different. Richard Montgomery had hidden assets across multiple countries, shell corporations, and family trusts that were nearly impossible to penetrate. His lawyers fought every request for information, claimed attorney-client privilege on everything, and delayed proceedings at every turn. They're going to drag this out for years, James said, frustration evident in his voice. Richard Montgomery might be in prison, but his family still has power and money. They're protecting their empire. During a particularly contentious deposition, one of Montgomery's lawyers actually tried to argue that I'd been complicit in the scheme, that I'd known what was happening and had only come forward when I realized the plan wasn't going to benefit me. That's an outrageous accusation, James snapped. Ms. Clark was a victim who had a medical procedure performed on her without her consent. Your client is in prison for conspiracy to commit murder. Show some respect. The lawyer backed off, but the accusation stung. Even now, even after everything, they were still trying to blame me for what had been done to me. Belle had been strangely quiet through most of the civil proceedings. From prison, she declined to give depositions or participate in any way. Her lawyers claimed she was exercising her Fifth Amendment rights. But then, unexpectedly, she requested a meeting with me. Absolutely not, was James's immediate response. She's trying to manipulate you. What could she possibly say that would change anything? I don't know, and I don't want to find out. These people are dangerous, Simone. Even from behind bars they can hurt you. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. What did Belle want? Was she going to threaten me again? Try to convince me to drop the civil suits? Or did she genuinely have something to say? Against James's advice, I agreed to the meeting. It would take place at the prison with guards present and everything recorded. James insisted on coming with me along with Patricia for additional support. The prison was exactly as grim as I'd imagined. Gray walls, harsh lighting, the smell of industrial cleaner failing to mask other, less pleasant odors. We were led through multiple security checkpoints before finally being shown to a small visiting room with a table and chairs bolted to the floor. Belle was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, her hands cuffed in front of her. Without her designer clothes and professional makeup, she looked ordinary, diminished. The sharp, dangerous woman I'd feared was gone, replaced by someone who looked tired and beaten down. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice lacking its usual polished confidence. "I'm here. Say what you need to say." Belle sat down carefully, the chains on her handcuffs rattling. "I wanted to apologize. I know that probably sounds hollow, coming from me, but I've had a lot of time to think in here and I realize how wrong I was. About everything. Is this some kind of strategy?" James asked. "Because if you think apologizing is going to make us drop the civil suits, you're mistaken. No strategy. I'm not trying to manipulate anyone. I just wanted Simone to know that I recognized what I did was evil. I destroyed lives because I was greedy and arrogant. I thought I was smarter than everyone else, that I could get away with it. I was wrong. You targeted me, I said. You selected me specifically. You arranged for me to meet Gregory. You planned everything. I did. You fit the profile we were looking for. Successful, independent, but isolated. No close family who would ask questions. I thought that made you vulnerable. I didn't think about the fact that it made you a person, someone with feelings and dreams and a right to live without being victimized. What about Helen Rodriguez? Did you think about her humanity when you helped kill her? Brielle flinched. Helen's death was the moment I realized how far we'd gone. I told my father I wanted out after that. He said it was too late, that I was already implicated, that the only way forward was to keep going. So I did. I kept going, kept destroying lives because I was too cowardly to face the consequences. And now you're facing them. Yes, 45 years. I'll be in my 80s if I ever get out. My father will die in here. Gregory will be an old man when he's released. We all lost everything because of our greed. I'm not going to feel sorry for you, I said. You made choices. Every step of the way you chose to hurt people. I know. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm just asking you to know that I understand what I did and I'm sorry. That's all. There was silence for a moment. Then Patricia leaned forward. Did you ever think about the women you were targeting? Did you ever consider us as human beings? No, Brielle admitted. I thought of you as projects, problems to be solved. I dehumanized you because it made it easier to do what we were doing. I'm ashamed of that now. Shame doesn't bring back my fertility, I said. Shame doesn't give me back the 5 years I spent married to a man who was planning to kill me. Shame is worthless without action. What action can I take from prison? You could testify in the civil case against your father's estate. You could provide information about where he hid assets. You could help us make sure every victim gets the compensation they deserve. Brielle looked at me for a long moment. If I do that, my family will disown me. They'll make sure I have nothing when I get out of here, assuming I ever do. They've already disowned you, James said. Your father's lawyers haven't visited you once, according to prison records. Your mother put the family home up for sale and moved to Europe. You're alone in this, Ms. Montgomery. Your family abandoned you the moment you couldn't be useful to them anymore. I watched Brielle process this information, saw the realization hit her that she'd sacrificed everything for people who didn't actually care about her. It was almost satisfying but also somehow sad. I'll do it, she said finally. I'll testify. I'll provide whatever information you need. Not because I think it will make up for what I did, but because it's the least I can do. We left the prison with a new witness statement scheduled. James was cautiously optimistic that Brielle's testimony could break open the Montgomery family's asset protection strategies. She's trying to find meaning in her punishment, Patricia observed as we drove back to the city. She wants to believe she's not entirely evil, that she can still do some good. Do you think people like her can change? I asked. I think anyone can change if they genuinely want to and they're willing to do the work. But I also think some actions can't be undone no matter how much someone changes. Brielle can become a better person, but that doesn't erase Helen's death or what was done to you. 3 weeks later, Brielle testified in our civil case against the Montgomery estate. She provided detailed information about offshore accounts, shell corporations, and real estate holdings that her father had hidden from the courts. She explained how the family business had been used to launder money and fund illegal operations for decades. Her testimony was devastating to her father's defense. The judge ordered a complete audit of Montgomery family holdings and froze accounts we didn't even know existed. Suddenly, the impossible case looked winnable. Richard Montgomery, watching from prison via video link, looked like he wanted to reach through the screen and silence his daughter. But he was powerless now. His empire was crumbling and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Every day brought new revelations about the scope of the Montgomery family's operations. It wasn't just the medical fraud scheme. They'd been involved in money laundering, bribery, and what the prosecutor called a pattern of predatory practices targeting vulnerable individuals. When the verdict came in, the jury awarded our group of victims $45 million in combined damages from the Montgomery estate. My portion was $12 million, the largest individual award. This is life-changing money, James said. With what you've already received from other cases, you're set for life financially. But the money felt strange in my hands. I'd never wanted to be rich. I just wanted justice. Still, the money meant I could expand the foundation, help more women, make a real difference. I'm donating half of it to New Beginning, I told Patricia and Tasha that evening. The foundation needs it more than I do. That's $6 million, Tasha said. Are you sure? I'm sure. This money came from pain and suffering. I want to use it to prevent more pain and suffering. It feels right. With the infusion of funds, New Beginning grew exponentially. We opened satellite offices in 3 other cities. We hired more staff, expanded our services, and launched a national hotline. Within a year, we were helping hundreds of women. The legal battles weren't quite over. There were still appeals to deal with, final settlements to negotiate, loose ends to tie up. But the major fights had been won. The defendants were in prison. The victims had been compensated. Justice, imperfect as it was, had been served. 2 years after my testimony, I attended a support group meeting at the foundation. A new member, a woman named Jennifer, was telling her story about escaping a controlling marriage. As I listened, I realized how far I'd come. I could hear these stories now without being triggered, without reliving my own trauma. I could be present for these women without drowning in my own pain. You look different, Patricia observed after the meeting. Lighter somehow. I feel different. Like I'm finally becoming the person I was supposed to be all along. Like I'm not defined by what happened to me anymore. That's healing, Patricia said. That's what it looks like. That night I updated my journal. I'd been keeping a record of my journey, documenting not just the legal battles but the emotional ones too. Looking back at entries from a year ago, I barely recognized the woman who'd written them. She'd been so angry, so hurt, so lost. This woman, the one I was now, was stronger. Not because the pain had gone away but because I'd learned to carry it differently. To use it as motivation rather than let it use me as a victim. The battle had been long and exhausting. But we'd won. And in winning, we'd created something that would help ensure fewer women had to fight the same battle in the future. That was worth everything. The appeal hearings began 3 years after the original convictions. Gregory's lawyers argued that his confession had been coerced, that the evidence against him had been tainted by illegal searches. Brielle's lawyers claimed jury misconduct. Richard Montgomery's team filed motions claiming judicial bias and prosecutorial misconduct. This is standard procedure, James explained during one of our preparation meetings. They're throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. But the convictions were solid. The evidence was overwhelming. I don't think any of these appeals will succeed. He was right, but that didn't make sitting through the hearings any easier. Listening to defense attorneys argue that the wrong people had been convicted, that the real victims were their clients, was infuriating. The appeals court spent 6 months reviewing the cases before issuing their decisions. All 3 appeals were denied. The convictions stood. The sentences remained unchanged. It's really over this time, Tasha said when we got the news. They've run out of options. But there was one more revelation waiting. During a routine audit of the Montgomery family's financial records, investigators discovered something that changed everything. There had been another attempted victim. A woman named Sophie Martinez who'd been targeted by the same operation 2 years before Helen Rodriguez. Sophie had survived, but barely. She'd gotten suspicious when her husband, a Montgomery business associate, insisted she have a medical procedure she didn't think she needed. She'd gotten a second opinion from a doctor who'd found nothing wrong with her. When she'd confronted her husband, he'd attempted to stage her death as a suicide. Sophie had managed to escape and had disappeared, changing her identity and moving across the country. She'd been too terrified to come forward during the original investigation, afraid that the Montgomery family would find her and finish what they'd started. But now that they're all in prison, Sophie told me during a video call, I want to tell my story. I want people to know how extensive this operation was. Sophie's testimony led to the reopening of several other suspicious deaths. 3 more cases, spanning 8 years, showed the same pattern. Wives of Montgomery business associates dying under suspicious circumstances shortly after having expensive insurance policies taken out. This wasn't just a scheme, the prosecutor told the media during a press conference. This was a serial operation that may have resulted in as many as 6 deaths and targeted at least a dozen women. We're continuing to investigate. The revelation made national news. Suddenly, my case wasn't just about me and Helen and the few other known victims. It was about a decade-long conspiracy that had destroyed families and ended lives, all in the name of profit. Thomas Rodriguez called me the day the news broke. I always knew there had to be others, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Helen wasn't the only one. I'm glad we can finally prove it. But for me, the news brought a complicated mix of emotions. Relief that the full scope of the operation was finally being revealed. Grief for the women who hadn't survived. And something like survivor's guilt. Why had I lived when others had died? What made me different? You got lucky with your doctor, Dr. Morrison told me during our therapy session. Dr. Hammond paid attention when something seemed off. She took the time to investigate. Many doctors wouldn't have. You survived because someone cared enough to look deeper. The foundation organized a memorial service for all the known victims. We held it in a park with 7 trees planted to honor the women who died, Helen Rodriguez and 6 others whose cases were now being investigated. Sophie Martinez attended, standing beside Thomas Rodriguez, 2 survivors honoring those who hadn't made it. Their deaths weren't in vain, I said during my speech. Because of what happened to them, we were able to stop this operation. We were able to save others. They'll never be forgotten. The media attention on the case led to increased donations to the foundation. Money poured in from across the country. People wanted to help, wanted to do something to prevent more tragedies like this. With the additional funding, we launched a new program, Medical Advocacy Services. Trained advocates who could accompany women to doctor appointments, help them ask the right questions, ensure they understood their treatment options. It was exactly the kind of service that might have helped Helen or the other victims if it had existed. You're building a legacy, Patricia told me as we reviewed the program plans. Not just for yourself, but for all the women who came before you and all the women who'll come after. But the revelations weren't done. During depositions for one of the newly discovered cases, a different pattern emerged. The Montgomery family hadn't just targeted wives. They'd also been involved in targeting elderly individuals, people with substantial estates and no close family. Similar schemes, similar methods, but different victims. They were running multiple operations simultaneously, James explained, showing me documents from the new investigation. The wives were just one piece of a larger criminal enterprise. The scope of it was staggering. Estimates suggested the Montgomery family and their associates had stolen more than $200 million over 15 years. Dozens of people had been victimized. Several had died under suspicious circumstances. Additional charges were filed. Gregory, already in prison, faced new counts related to cases he'd been involved in before our marriage. Belle was charged in 3 additional schemes. Richard Montgomery's sentence was updated to reflect the full scope of his crimes. They're adding another 20 years to your ex-husband's sentence, James told me. He'll be in prison for at least 35 years now, possibly longer. Gregory, to his credit, didn't fight the new charges. He accepted responsibility and provided testimony in all the new cases. It didn't make up for what he'd done, but it helped bring closure to other families. 4 years after the original trial, I testified again. This time in a case involving the death of an elderly man named Walter Chin. His daughter, Linda, had suspected foul play but hadn't been able to prove anything until our investigation uncovered evidence of Richard Montgomery's involvement. "Thank you," Linda said to me after the verdict came in. "My father didn't get justice while he was alive, but at least now everyone knows the truth." The testimonies, the trials, the constant revisiting of trauma took their toll. I found myself exhausted, burned out from years of fighting. Some days, I wondered if it would ever truly be over or if I'd be dealing with the consequences of Gregory's actions for the rest of my life. "You need to take care of yourself," Dr. Morrison told me. "You've been fighting for years. It's okay to step back, to rest, to let others carry the burden for a while." She was right. I'd been running on adrenaline and determination for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to just exist without a battle to fight. I needed to remember how to live, not just survive. I took a sabbatical from the foundation, leaving Patricia and Tasha in charge for 3 months while I traveled. I went to places I'd always wanted to see, the mountains of Colorado, the beaches of Hawaii, the art museums of New York. I traveled alone, rediscovering who I was when I wasn't defined by my trauma or my advocacy work. In Hawaii, sitting on a beach watching the sunset, I felt something shift inside me. The anger that had been driving me for years began to fade, replaced by something else. Not forgiveness exactly, but acceptance. Acceptance that what had happened to me was terrible, but also that it was over. The people responsible were in prison. Justice had been served as much as it could be. I could let go now. Not of the memories or the lessons learned, but of the need to keep fighting, keep proving, keep seeking revenge. I'd won. It was time to move forward with my life. When I returned from my sabbatical, I met with Patricia and Tasha to discuss the foundation's future. "I think it's time for me to step back from day-to-day operations," I told them. "I'll stay on the board, I'll still be involved, but I need to build a life that's about more than what was done to me." What will you do? Tasha asked. I don't know yet. That's the exciting part. For the first time in years, I get to choose what comes next. Not as a reaction to trauma, but as an active choice about the life I want to live. The foundation threw me a farewell party, though I wasn't really leaving, just transitioning to a different role. 50 women attended, all women we'd helped over the years. Each one shared how the foundation had impacted their lives, how they'd been able to escape dangerous situations, rebuild their lives, and find hope again. You gave us more than resources, one woman said. You gave us an example. You showed us that survival is possible, that we could fight back and win. That's worth more than any amount of money or services. Standing there, surrounded by women who'd found their strength partly because I'd found mine, I realized something important. The revelations in court, the additional charges, the years of legal battles, they'd all been necessary. Not just for justice, but to ensure that the full truth came out. To make sure that every victim was acknowledged, every crime was exposed. And now, with that work done, I could finally start living for myself instead of in reaction to what had been done to me. The revelations were complete. The battles were won. The only thing left was to figure out what came next. And for the first time in years, I was excited to find out. 5 years after that ultrasound appointment that changed everything, I stood in an art gallery in Santa Fe, watching people examine paintings I'd created over the past year. The exhibition was called Reclamation, a series of abstract works exploring themes of identity, trauma, and renewal. This one is powerful, a woman said, standing in front of a large canvas dominated by deep blues and vibrant greens, colors that represented the ocean and growth. You can feel the struggle and the triumph in every brushstroke. I smiled but didn't reveal that I was the artist. I'd learned to enjoy moments of anonymity, times when people responded to my work without knowing my story. It felt freeing to be seen for what I created rather than what had been done to me. Painting had become my therapy and my passion. What started as something Dr. Morrison suggested I try had evolved into a second career. I discovered that I could express things with color and texture that I couldn't put into words. Each painting was a piece of my journey, a visual representation of healing. Tasha appeared beside me with 2 glasses of champagne. Your first solo exhibition is a hit. 5 paintings already sold, and we're only an hour into the opening. I still can't believe people want to buy my work. Why not? You're talented. You have something to say. And you're finally letting yourself be seen as more than a survivor. She was right. For years, I'd been defined by what had happened to me. The woman who'd been betrayed by her billionaire husband. The victim who'd fought back. The survivor who'd built a foundation. All of those things were true, but they weren't the complete picture of who I was. This version of me, the one who painted and traveled and had started taking guitar lessons just because I'd always wanted to, was maybe the truest version. The one that existed independent of Gregory, independent of the trial, independent of everything except my own choices. The foundation was thriving under Patricia's leadership. They'd helped over 1,000 women in 5 years and had expanded to 8 cities. I still served on the board and attended quarterly meetings, but the daily operations no longer consumed my life. Instead, I spent my days in my studio, a converted warehouse space with huge windows that let in natural light. I'd painted the walls a soft green, hung plants everywhere, and created a space that felt alive and nurturing. This was my sanctuary, the place where I could be completely myself without having to explain or justify or defend. My phone buzzed with a text from James. Final settlement approved. Montgomery estate liquidation complete. Your share deposited today. 5 years of legal battles had finally concluded. The Montgomery family's empire had been dismantled piece by piece, assets seized and distributed among victims. My total compensation, including all settlements and awards, came to just over $20 million. It was more money than I'd ever imagined having. But it also felt like blood money, payment for suffering that no amount of money could truly compensate. I'd already decided what to do with most of it. $10 million would go to the foundation, $5 million would be invested to provide ongoing financial security, and $5 million would be used to establish an art scholarship for women who'd survived trauma. You don't have to give it all away, Tasha had said when I'd told her my plans. You earned that money through what you survived. I don't want my life to be defined by that money. I want to use it to create something positive, something that helps others. Otherwise, it's just a reminder of the worst time in my life. In the gallery, a young woman approached me hesitantly. Excuse me, are you Simone? The artist? I nodded and she smiled nervously. I wanted to thank you. I came to your foundation 2 years ago. I was in a marriage where my husband controlled everything, my money, my medical care, my entire life. The foundation helped me leave, helped me get back on my feet. When I saw your art exhibition was opening, I had to come. Your work, it captures exactly what it felt like to escape and start over. Thank you, I said, genuinely moved. Stories like yours are why I do this work. Both the foundation and the art. Can I ask you something? The woman said. Do you still think about him? About what he did? Sometimes, I admitted. But less than I used to. He took 5 years of my life, but I refuse to let him take any more. I choose where I focus my energy now, and I choose to focus on creating, not dwelling on the past. After she left, I thought about her question. Did I still think about Gregory? Yes, but not in the way I used to. The rage had faded. The betrayal still stung when I let myself think about it, but it no longer consumed me. He was a chapter in my life, not the whole story. I'd heard through James that Gregory had become a model prisoner, teaching financial literacy classes to other inmates and continuing to cooperate with authorities on related cases. He'd be eligible for parole in 10 more years when he'd be nearly 60. Whether he'd be released was uncertain, but either way he'd spent the best years of his life in prison. Belle, according to news reports, had found religion in prison and was apparently counseling other inmates. I didn't know if her transformation was genuine or another performance. It didn't really matter. She'd spend at least another 25 years behind bars regardless of her spiritual journey. Richard Montgomery had died in prison the previous year, never showing a moment of remorse for his crimes. His obituary in the newspaper had been brief and factual, no mention of the dozens of lives he'd destroyed. His family had held a private funeral that no one from our side was invited to. Good riddance, Patricia had said when she'd heard the news. The world is better without him in it. Later that evening, after the gallery opening ended, I stood on the balcony of my apartment overlooking the Santa Fe Plaza. The city was beautiful at night, full of life and color and possibility. This was my home now, a place I'd chosen because I loved it, not because I was running from something or hiding from someone. My phone rang. It was Thomas Rodriguez. I saw the article about your exhibition, he said. Helen would have loved your work. She always said you could see a person's soul in their art. We talked for a while about his life. He'd remarried the previous year, finding love again after years of grief. Helen would want me to be happy, he told me when he'd shared the news. She'd want me to live fully, not just exist. After we hung up, I thought about his words. Living fully, not just existing. That's what I was doing now. Every day was a choice to embrace life rather than merely survive it. I'd started dating again, cautiously at first, but more confidently as time passed. Nothing serious yet, but I'd learned I could trust my instincts again. I could enjoy someone's company without constantly questioning their motives or looking for red flags. Dr. Morrison had helped me understand that what Gregory did didn't mean all men were dangerous or that I was a bad judge of character. It meant one specific man had been a skilled manipulator who'd targeted me deliberately. That wasn't my fault, and it didn't define my future relationships. You're ready to move forward, Dr. Morrison had told me during our last session 6 months ago. You don't need weekly therapy anymore. You've done the work. You've healed as much as anyone can heal from this kind of trauma. Now you just need to live. So I was living. I took a pottery class and made lopsided bowls that I loved anyway. I joined a book club and made new friends who knew me as Simone the artist, not Simone the survivor. I hiked in the mountains and learned to rock climb and said yes to experiences that scared me a little. My relationship with my body had healed too. The anger I'd felt about the procedure, about having my choice stolen, had transformed into acceptance. I couldn't have biological children, but I'd started mentoring young women through the foundation. I was an aunt figure to Tasha's new baby, born 3 months ago. Family, I'd learned, wasn't just biology. It was choice and commitment and love. Standing on that balcony, looking out at the city I'd chosen as my home, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Not the peace of victory or revenge, but the peace of acceptance. Of knowing that I'd survived something terrible and come through it stronger. Of recognizing that my story didn't end with betrayal but continued into healing and growth and possibility. My phone buzzed with a message from the gallery owner: 8 paintings sold tonight. Can you create more for a follow-up show next year? I smiled and typed back, absolutely. I have so much more to say. Because that was the truth. I wasn't done telling my story, but now I was telling it on my own terms, in my own way. Through art and advocacy, through the life I was building, through every choice I made to embrace joy and possibility rather than dwell on pain. Gregory had tried to write my story for me. He tried to make me a victim, a tragedy, a cautionary tale. Instead, I'd rewritten the ending. I'd turned pain into purpose, trauma into art, survival into a full and meaningful life. 6 months later, I stood in the same gallery for my second exhibition. This one was called Forward, a series of paintings that were brighter, more optimistic, filled with light and color and movement. "Your work has evolved," a critic noted in his review. "The earlier pieces showed struggle and emergence. These new works show arrival, joy, and confidence. This is the work of an artist who's found her voice." He was right. I had found my voice. Not the voice of a victim or even a survivor, but the voice of a woman who'd lived through hell and chosen to create beauty from it. Who'd faced evil and refused to let it make her bitter or broken. At the opening, I stood surrounded by friends, both old and new. Tasha was there with her baby. Patricia came with her husband. Thomas Rodriguez flew in with his new wife. Sophie Martinez attended via video call from across the country. Even Dr. Hammond, the doctor who'd started everything by refusing to ignore what she saw on that ultrasound, came to celebrate. "Look at what you've built," Dr. Hammond said, gesturing at the paintings and the people and the life I'd created. "This is what courage looks like. This is what healing looks like." As I stood there, looking at the visual representation of my journey covering the gallery walls, I realized something profound. Gregory hadn't destroyed me. He'd tried, but he'd failed. I'd survived. I'd healed. I'd thrived. And more than that, I'd helped others do the same. The foundation had saved lives. My art had touched people. My story had given hope to women who thought they'd never escape their own nightmares. That night, I updated my journal one last time. 5 years ago, a doctor told me to divorce my husband after an ultrasound revealed my whole marriage was a lie. Today, I stood in an art gallery surrounded by people who loved me, celebrating a life I built from the ashes of that devastation. I won. Not because they're in prison, though they are. Not because I got justice and compensation, though I did. I won because I refused to let what they did to me define what I became. I took the worst thing that ever happened to me and transformed it into something beautiful. That's my revenge. That's my victory. That's my life. As I closed the journal, I looked around my apartment. Plants thrived in every corner. My artwork covered the walls. Books I'd read for pleasure lined the shelves. Guitar music played softly from the speakers. Everything in this space was mine, chosen by me, reflecting who I was and who I wanted to be. I'd survived. But more importantly, I'd learned to live. Fully, joyfully, authentically. Without fear, without constraint, without anyone controlling my choices or defining my worth. The story that began with betrayal and violation had ended with freedom and self-determination. And that, I realized, was the best possible ending. Not revenge, not even justice, but the simple, profound gift of living life on my own terms. That was enough. That was everything.